Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Disruption Talks. Actually, we've been having an internal conversation and we noticed that the project has been going on for 8 months now. And I'll be honest with you, initially we started with the idea of tech always being the common denominator, but we had no idea where it would take us because today's episode concerns art as much as it concerns technology. So, when you think of it, technology has allowed for a much broader access to art, and also it has given a wonderful platform for many people. When previously in historic times, you would have to have a sponsor, you would have to go to art school, whilst here, YouTube as your teacher and all the platforms as your sponsor is all you need right now to make it happen. However, the other aspect of technology meeting art that we will be discussing today is not just the breadth of access, but actually how far into the future we can go when tech meets art. But before I introduce my guest, I will show you a video of the art in its form itself. So, without further ado,
One, two, three, four, five. One, two, three, four, five.
Enough for a piece of rosum. As there's a for with VDM and this exploration just
So, Harry, I'll say this. Just recently, my friend taught me how to express emotions with linking them to flavors. So instead of just saying fire, I'll say fire wings and hot sauce. I really like that video. So great to have you here. Listen, I think it would be great for you to give an introduction of yourself because try as I might, with business people, I think it's much more defined and it's going to be much better if you do it. So, right over to you.
Yeah, I guess artists are finding new ways to describe their roles every day. I live two lives. One is for music and performance, but over the past 3 years, I founded my own creative studio, and artistic expertise being used to explore technology is becoming more important every day. I am part of the Experiments and Art Technology program at Nokia Bell Labs. I'm also the founder of R100 Studios. And effectively, I work with leading researchers and thinkers, helping them use art, installation, and performance to explore complex ideas. And I think the general public deserves to experience complex ideas, experience important ideas. And it's become my mission to fight misinformation, fight sensationalism via the medium of art.
All right, and as far as my research goes, you're doing this at every level, even at the sort of upper echelon. I know that you've done one in Davos 2020, a closing concert, was it?
Yes, so I was brought in as a director. I said the last thing at the 50th anniversary of Davos in 2020, just before the world stopped. But my role there is as a culture leader. So it's a program that they have where they have figures in arts and culture who effectively help people understand the importance of arts and culture, of the arts, of expression in problem sort of solving stages, especially global problem solving stages. So as an individual, I'm creating works all the time. But as a communicator, I'm moving between institutions, United Nations, Davos, spaces like this, being an artistic communicator and helping bridge the gap between the worlds. And I'll get into maybe why that's so important. But what's fascinating is many artists don't have the language, and many institutions don't always see the connection between artists and trying to solve global problems, but both are abstract, difficult issues, and artists are the governors of narrative. They very much are in charge of helping a process, an idea connect and communicate. And artistic expertise is more and more important every day. But I'll get into that a little bit more later.
Artists are the governors of the narrative. Love it. Team, surely a quotable image for later. And I can't believe I've got no clue how I missed your performance in Davos because I actually was there. So I feel guilty and my apologies. But I think it would be unfair to box you in, to pigeonhole you as a beatboxer, right? So for me, from what I see, you are more of a matchmaker between voice and the technological platform that is towards the equation of a specific outcome. And I think that instead of me just babbling on about this, what would help the audience understand how is it that your life looks, if you could speak, what's a day in the life of Harry? What's a day in the life in terms of, do you work in terms of project oriented cycles, or how does that look?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I still am a beatboxer, and that's not a phrase that everybody understands or knows about. But effectively, I've been experimenting with voice from a very, very young age. And I found that the voice as a medium is extremely exciting, because even though there is a limited palette, and even though it's something as old as humanity itself, there is the opportunity to innovate. And what's so bizarre is that the culture that I'm from has been massively embraced by the academic world. Because when we think of communication, when we think of the ways in which we understand our bodies, the voice is an absolute fundamental, and it's often ignored. When we think about our working relationships, if we think about how we speak to each other, there is a massive O that we sort of have to acknowledge to the voice. And I still push my voice to today. I write, I compose, but this second head, which is effectively as a creative director, is developing strategy, exactly as you said, being able to find spaces between technologists, artists, programmers, leaders, being able to spin that web and create projects which vary day to day. But there's always that central theme that is voice. So when I'm not writing and composing music, when I'm not performing, effectively, I have a number of relationships with institutions, with individuals who are developing new technologies. And as I mentioned, this idea of artists being the governors of narratives, what I do is I come in, I use that technology, I write installations, I write performances, I create works, I develop theory around that specific tech. And that can do a number of things. So it can be for the spectacle, which is amazing. And of course, like, I love to just create art, full stop. But what I'm more interested in is when you can produce an artwork, it contributes to the narrative that is the zeitgeist around that specific technology, which is really, really important. It's something that's often missed. But most importantly is that artistic expression can directly contribute to research and development. So contrary to what people think, I think artists are normally brought in as a decorative piece. It's almost okay, we've developed this thing and now we want an artist to come in just because maybe they have a large following, maybe it's going to be an attractive thing that happens. But what's happening more and more is an artist in research role. And this is what I deeply care about. All the projects that I create, there's some element of trying to deeply consider the needs of the technologists, of the creators of the technology, and to actually push whatever it might be forward. So I really, really care about that as a director and as an artist. But me personally, if we come back to Reap Swan and Harry, like, I'm obsessed and deeply in love with the human voice. And I guess again and again and again, wherever I go, there is this kind of revealing of maybe we didn't sort of acknowledge the voice as much as we should. And also there are new things being discovered. So I connect all of these worlds. I have these two heads, and it's extremely interesting and exciting day by day.
Agreed. I mean, especially in terms of tech and voice, even before we get to the element of art, there's the practical utility. And I remember how, I don't know, let's say maybe 2013, even in the UK, when you would be walking around with your phone and you would be talking to it to send a voice message instead of texting, you still were borderline between, like, what are you doing? Why are you just not texting texts, just sending that? Whilst personally, for me, it's been an absolute relief because I hate figuring out what a person meant just from text. I'm lacking the intonation, I'm lacking the emotion, I'm lacking everything that sends me so many more signals than just the text. So right there with you. You just mentioned a lot of things that the artist delivers to the partner as the benefit. And I want to flip that question. Working with Nokia's Bell Labs or World Economic Forum, outside of the obvious network effects and having access to the platform, what are the things that you recognize as the biggest benefits of collaborating with such bodies?
Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge Bell Labs specifically are the absolute pioneers of that kind of relationship. So in the early 1960s, there was something called the 9 Evenings, where Rauschenberg, who's a very, very famous artist, met some of the top engineers, and they ended up doing the world's first collaboration of its type, which was to have 9 evenings, 9 collaborations, 9 works, which are artists utilizing the technology of Bell Labs, who, especially back then, were effectively like tech gods. They were, if you look into Bell Labs, I'm not going to go into that too much. The history is incredible. And what happened even then, which was fascinating, is that there is this opportunity to interrupt the ways and methods that people work, and especially engineers work. I think that artists being interrupters, so the phrase that I use is being an intelligent interrupter. That is not to disrupt, which is to kind of completely change or break down. It's just to bring a fresh, new perspective. And if the artist does truly intelligently interrupt, what that means is that they have some level of understanding of the technology. They are fusing like with the work. And what you find is a lateral exploration of the process or the work that's being developed. And what we see is again and again, that is amazing for the kind of the ability to communicate the technology, to share the technology, accessibility in terms of audience, understanding, like reach. But there's some very interesting examples of how art can lead to the betterment of a technology, which is really fascinating. And I guess I can bring up some examples for that, like a little bit later. But artists being intelligent interrupters is a really, really exciting new space, and it's happening more and more.
Especially that it sounds like the only reason for the interruption is to connect better what was just interrupted, right? So it's not really interrupting the way we are used to think about it when we hear somebody interrupted something. Okay, so Voice Gems, or C-Sound Evolved, a digital vocal sculpting tool. If you are lucky enough to have watched Harry's TED Talk or anything on his YouTube channel, you might be familiar with it. But just in case you're not, I'm going to pop it on the screen. And then, Harry, of course, you're going to have to tell us something about this.
Okay, yeah, so this is the Voice Gem piece. So you might be wondering what this is. So this is an example of a voice to generative system. So in South by Southwest, I think in 2018, I met with a creative director there called Rama Allen, who's used to be part of The Mill in New York. And we discussed how every single voice on planet Earth is like a jewel. And if we think of all of the social information, all of the nuance that's stored in every single one of our voices, it can be hard to sort of identify that. So it's actually proven on an evolutionary level and a neurological level that we have a level of blind spot when it comes to perceiving our voices, and especially the movement of our voices. So when we move our hands, we're very aware of the placement. We have a really great spatial awareness. Actually, when it comes to our voices, if we move our tongues and we move our mouths, it's actually quite a hard thing to perceive. So we were thinking, how can we re-acknowledge the voice? How can we explore that in new ways? And what you're seeing in this piece, which is C-Sound, is the ability to, in real time, to sing, to hum, to speak. And that is represented as a visual structure. So you might think, what's the function of that? And I mentioned that there's already this idea that you can visualize voice, but for me, that's not enough. The reason this project was interesting is that the voice is a really incredible gateway to think about expression. So when we, as I touched on, we think about our relationships and how we connect to each other, there is a connection between expression and also our sense of self. So when we speak, we're not just connecting with the world around us, we're also defining who we are. And the more that we can be encouraged to explore our voices or push our voices, there is this very interesting double effect that we are also exploring ourselves. We are also pushing our minds. And this project was set up as an installation in New York. We had several hundred people come to create voice sculptures. And there was one happening on that day that completely redefined the way that, not just the way that I approach voice, but the way that I approach technology and the role of installations and the role of art like this, which is very important. It's fair to think, why do artists matter in this space? This very young girl who was almost like a koala bear on her father's leg, extremely shy, did not want to talk to anyone. She slowly walked up to the microphone, and what we had was the sculptures projected huge on a wall. And luckily, her father encouraged her to try, and she started with these very small sounds, very, very tiny, very, very shy. But when she saw her voice visualized in this way, so she had this different mode of feedback, she flowered. She went from these small sounds into shouts and screams and laughter. And this very kind of simple, sentimental story, it shows two things. It shows the power of voice in terms of a medium to open up, to explore, and especially when it comes to technology, how that can be an access point. Exploring voice with tech is an exciting thing. But what's more important is the voice is an opportunity to open someone up. There is a predisposition. We are designed to be masterful with our voices. And it was the augmented relationship with a technology like that which created a new behavior. So I think that augmenting with technology, creating installations, creating work separate to voice is vital to creating new behaviors. We can fuse with technology, we can fuse with tools like this and actually encourage new things to happen. But the most exciting thing is this idea of I use the medium of the voice to explore that subject. And the voice is an incredible sort of subject matter. And that project showed that if I can make this young girl sort of open up and express, all of my installations, all of my ideas should have that same effect. It should make people explore their voice, and it should allow them to actually behave or try or develop a new habit or new skill. So just being pretty is not enough. I'm very interested in those narratives. And actually, the first clip that you saw is the evolution of that project. So the most recent piece is called Voice Gems. And just very, very briefly, what's very exciting about that project is I've moved from just thinking about performance and individuals coming in and trying this. It's about collecting voices, and I'm most excited about collecting some of the most vulnerable voices in the world. And in that clip, you heard an animal, and that animal is called an injury. It's on the critically endangered list, and we are now creating a set of these gemstones, which are generated by these critically endangered species. Yeah, so what's really interesting, just to give an insight into the thought process, is we're going to place those images on the blockchain as NFTs and use the blockchain as a medium of permanence. So I'm really, really excited about that project, but we're not showing much at the moment. That was like a little tease at the beginning.
You heard it here first. Netguru is the place where art, perhaps not leaks, but reveals happen first. Any timeline for this? When can we expect the entire thing?
So yeah, we're going to be releasing in a couple of months. I don't know how aware sort of the audience is going to be of these like collaborators, but the two sets, some are collaborative sets. So currently I'm making gems for Reggie Watts, Lily Cole. There's a Philippe Pantone and some really, really incredible artists and voices that I want to celebrate. But these two sets, one is for critically endangered species and the other one is for dying languages. So the idea is that you can actually use abstract representation, use these generative systems of which we can actually generate these gems up to 16,000 by 16,000 resolution. And maybe if you're outside of the art space, you're thinking, well, like that's an abstract concept and they're not directly connected. But as artists, my job is to create these new connections and fight for the voices, fight for the stories that I think are most important. And I think this project really allows me to pick anyone in the world that I want to be highlighted. And you can see that journey from C sound to voice gems, this idea of encouraging and highlighting a voice is extremely powerful. So we have a lot of interest in this and being able to kind of raise awareness for these like very beautiful animals. And I think that's a great function of art, is to be able to just highlight and help. And this practical influence, not just decorative, you're able to influence the world around you. And that's what I'm most excited about.
And just wrapping up on that point, I mean, parents, if you're listening, please stop telling your kids to keep it quiet, tone it down, or not be so loud, because if you take that volume down a notch when they're kids, they're going to have to be unlocked later. So just give them the opportunity to shine when they're still young. Another question I want to ask, what is the difference between an equation where there is no artist in enterprise setting when it comes to innovation? What is the doors that you open that otherwise perhaps either they would take ages to open or they wouldn't even think about opening to begin with?
That's a really, really interesting question. So, as I mentioned before, I think if you have a world-class team, and you do not have world-class empaths or world-class artists on that team, you have a missing link. And you could ask, a missing link to what? I believe that communication, and especially traditional forms of communication, when it comes to media, and even just in a workplace, and this is what's so important, people are tired. I think we're massively overloaded, and I think that actually there is very, very rigid ways in which these absolutely fundamentally important ideas are communicated. And the experiential space, being able to have new methods for communicating ideas, being able to actually make ideas experiential, to have new modes of communication, because there are many. This allows for an engagement and a connection that traditional forms of media and traditional forms of communication don't allow. So what we are actually fighting at the moment is a pandemic of misinformation. There is an absolute attack on expertise, and it's extremely dangerous. So when we think of big problems, so if we move away from the workplace and we think of things like climate change, for example, that requires huge collective action, but more importantly, it requires quite small pieces of information which are being defined as true by experts to actually be internalized by the general public. And what you have there is a very difficult problem, because you can have a whole chain of expertise which are using the most remarkable tools of reasoning that we've developed. But when it comes to actually action, the general public need to be a part of that process. And what's happening is that very last chain, you're losing that connection. And it's due to many things. As I mentioned, we are overstimulated, we are overloaded. And what the artist can do is bridge that gap. So instead of thinking about text, if you're thinking about VR, AR, experiential, if you're thinking about projection, if you think about storytelling, narrative, all of these things are within the realms of artistic expertise. And if there is an idea as a company or as an institution or as a nation that is believed to be important, you now need the artist to make sure that that connects. And it's not that the artist replaces the expertise. The artist is now, and the director or the creative is now the catalyst to make sure that intention, that knowledge, that process connects. So this role of like redefining the artist as a painter with a beret, which many people still think an artist is a painter with a beret in a studio in Berlin. Actually, the artist is a catalyst. They're a communicator. They're a strategist. They're able to understand the ways in which individuals connect with media, with ideas, and they're able to influence and bridge that gap. And that's something that everybody needs now. And you will just see that more and more and more.
So I've got two light philosophical questions right now. One's going to concern imagination, another one's going to concern evolution. The evolution one just came to my mind right now, so it's slightly unscripted, but I was just past week having a fruitful argument concerning this, because just like you mentioned, overworked, overloaded, and perhaps overstimulated, with the hint that it's all because of screen time. It's all because of digital interaction. However, let's assume it feels uncomfortable, even for the people who are the best, most connected people, just like to an IV with their phone. It still feels like something that's overbearing. However, bearing in mind that change is almost always uncomfortable, I ask you this: 2030, 2040, it's not going to get better. It's not going to become less screen time. The immersion is just going to be enthralling our lives with a race to the bottom until it's an entire immersion of our lives. So are we not just right now being slightly resistant to evolution because it feels uncomfortable, but the path for the relationship between humankind and technology is just inevitable, and we're trying to run away from the doors that are closing in, either we like it or not?
So I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna ask you a question. if you are to like look at yourself in the mirror, and I don't mean just like look at how you look. If you're to look at yourself dead in the eye, do you think that would make you feel uncomfortable?
That meaning looking myself in the eye.
Just like spending 30 seconds looking yourself in the mirror, um, like just deeply, kind of maybe no breaking, almost like you're another person. How do you think that would make you feel? And be honest, I'm not. There's no loaded to this. There's no right.
No, sure. I mean, personally, I think I'm big on eye contact, either with other people or myself, however that sounds. But generally speaking, I don't think I would experience discomfort. I know that actually, after a specific period of time of just blank looking into somebody's eyes, you start experiencing some psychedelic-like experiences where you over-focus on the eyes and all the other senses just take it down a notch. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't think that would make me feel uncomfortable.
Which is really interesting. So what it sounds like there is there's a level of familiarity. It sounds like you've thought about this before. You mentioned in this is something you're aware of, like the importance of eye contact. You have some level of instrumentation or methodology, like when it comes to that subject. The idea of being able to see oneself, I believe technology is vital for this. And what it's doing is I see all technology as these sort of other modes of a mirror. So you're able to see yourself, quantify yourself. Like as we know, data is God now, right? And I think that the question I asked you, everyone will have different opinions on that. But I think what technology does is it allows us to quantify, it allows us to observe in a way that I think makes people deeply uncomfortable because it's revealing. And that level of power and observation requires exactly like what you've done when it comes to the way you spoke about looking in the mirror. Is it requires a level of narrative. It requires a methodology or a process. It's an instrument. So to resist evolution, like just moving forward, I wouldn't put it like that, because that signifies that it's just a one-dimensional kind of a hallway to walk down, right?
Yeah,
but actually, there are so many skills to finding the wholesome and sort of most healthy uses of tech. So with specifically smart devices like phones, I believe that what we'll find is, instead of the most unhealthy manifestations, like the reasons people fight the idea of specifically social media, is because of reduction of attention span, this idea of addiction, the fact that it's a simulated space, it's taking people away from maybe other forms of social fundamentals that we see as important. But that's not exclusively the case for everyone. Some people are great at using technology. Some people have methodology. They have sort of an intuition. So I believe, like you, looking into the mirror of technology can be an extremely beautiful thing. And I think that it allows us to mine our evolution. It allows us to kind of stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Like I use the phrase that I believe we can stand on the shoulders of giant AIs. We can stand on the shoulders of AI to see further. But what you have, maybe in your space, like with you, I see you nodding in your head, like this makes sense. But when you speak to the general public, there are still narratives circulating that actually technology is bad. It's unwholesome. There's no way that it can sort of allow us to kind of move forward. It's moving backwards. And what we know is, and my opinion is that it's much more like an instrument, and we have to train and understand these very nuanced, beautiful connections that can be with tech. And that's where my work comes in, being able to show those nuanced relationships with technology, to be able to explore as I keep mentioning, like these other modes of connection. That's what I think is really, really inspiring. And I do this all the time in my work.
So the second philosophical question, this time on imagination. So a famous thinker, contemporary thinker, Slavoj Žižek, pretty sure is known to the audience. He says this: we feel free because we lack the very language to articulate our unfreedom, which counterintuitively does make sense. We cannot speak to that to which we don't have the words to express it, right? So you mentioned something similar in your TED Talk, comparing imagination being free and it being constrained by everything else that is not imagination. So the way we're used to living, talking, eating, breathing, everything really, right? So on the other hand, we have the fact that you created the AIs, the one that was your rival and the one that was your teacher. So I imagine that is like one of the ways of saying I will not be constrained by my externalities. I will create a pathway for my imagination to flourish. How can, if anybody can do that, not at the level that you're doing, but at the level of their everyday life, of escaping those constraints? Any ideas?
There's a lot in that question. So I think it's important to maybe give some context to like what I've done, if that's okay. So briefly, my relationship with AI started at a very young age. I think I was maybe 10 years old when my dad actually bought me a chess AI, like a physical computer. And I was a tournament chess player growing up. So that was actually my first love, was chess. Yeah, and I was obsessed, and I think many people can kind of fall into that. But when it was the holidays, I didn't have anybody to play. So my father bought me this computer, which became a friend, and it became something that really helped me improve my game. I had a fondness of it, which is an absolute flip of the general ways in which we talk about AI as this cold thing. And it's not that I personified it, but it was a system, it was a tool that I deeply benefited from. So 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of revisited that. And also, when we look at game theory, it's very established that this has been the kind of bastion in the ways of pushing artificial intelligence and human relationships. And I believe that our opponents, as in chess, can be an incredible collaborator. So collaboration isn't always about a harmony. Sometimes it can be about a friction. It can be about a challenge. So to go from human chess opponents into artificial chess opponents, and the lessons I learned from that, I was very interested in music, visual art. Can I go from human collaborators into artificial collaborators? And what I found was by using neural nets, using machine learning, collaborating with many different programmers around the world, trying to create huge data sets of voice, of me performing, singing, speaking. There were many different systems and interactions which go to this day, which, like a chess opponent, can push me further. So I've been interacting, speaking, singing with many second selves, many AI versions of my voice, which has challenged me and allowed me to progress. So the way that this applies to the average sort of creative process or insight, it starts with your view on data, and this is my opinion. So however you see data, think about the narrative that you have around it. What are those stories that come to mind? What are actually like the kind of imagery that comes along with that? And I think just by using your smart device, when you look at things about regarding how far you walk, thinking about the idea of being able to constantly capture what you do, I think that that is a really incredible view into your behaviors. It's a way of understanding yourself. It's a way of seeing yourself. And just like looking in the mirror, it's very true. It's very sort of objective, and that is not cold. And your attitude towards that is the most important thing. So before I spoke about this project and the technicality and the art, what's the most important aspect of my work is the narrative. It's the story. It's the attitude that you have towards a piece of technology. And my role in a conversation like this and with the work I make is to make you think about that. Every piece of technology that you use, what are the stories that you subconsciously associate with that? And it's something that really dictates your behaviors day to day, and you don't really think about it. So artists kind of reverse engineer that, where we're able to create those stories and make you think about it. But think about how you can, something called like the quantified self. Think about how you can quantify yourself through technology, quantify yourself through data, and try to enjoy the challenge of that, enjoy the objectivity of that. And by doing that, I guarantee as a person with your own volition, with your own interest, you're able to have tactics and strategy for your self-development, which I think is a really, really exciting and beautiful thing. But I totally understand that not everybody agrees with that.
You heard it here. I mean, you have screen time. You can go on your phone settings into the battery. It will show you what apps you're using the most, i.e. where you are spending or wasting the most time of your day. So now I wanted to ask you this, and I'm linking two questions. It's about your decision-making framework. And to give a basis for that, for example, because I always ask my guests this, but I've never asked this myself. And the simplest decision-making framework that I've managed to apply to myself is it good? And then, is it good for me? Like piece of cake or Long Island iced tea, hella good. Is it good for me? Perhaps not always, or at least in some moderation. So likewise here, I'm asking you about your decision-making framework. Can be as broad as specific as you like. But I want to link it to this question. When has your decision-making framework led you to some sort of conclusion that perhaps amalgamating art and tech here won't work? Have you ever seen something like that? Have you ever seen a project that ventured to mix the two and failed for some reason? And of course, I'm not asking about, let's names drop, this didn't work, but more of the causal factors, because especially I imagine when there's tech and art, even if it's so ignorant, as you mentioned at the beginning, that some companies say, oh, he will just have an artist, decorative form, it will just make us look better. So not greenwashing, but art washing, right? So even that's still built on good intentions. It's not like, hey, let's make money. It's rather, let's show ourselves in the better form. So to wrap it up in short, I know it's a big question. Decision-making framework, and when has the decision-making framework sort of shielded you from stepping into an anonymous project that could not have been a success?
So just to be clear, also what you said regarding, and I guess when I mentioned art just being decorative, that's not wrong. And okay. Yeah, which is again not what you were getting at, but it's been done. And this idea that there are other kinds of relationships that can be kicked up. There can be more integration. There can be more just quantifiable benefits from the sort of creative space is what's interesting. But that is a process that is developing every day. So I guess one of the key things, if I'm being general, not too specific, as an artist working on the bleeding edge of tech, I've been a part of a number of projects that are by definition world firsts. And that is obviously exciting, but that was not always sort of the case. That took a lot of testing and trying. Not every project can manifest. And what's the most important idea is you should not judge a system or a process by the process or system itself. It's the outcome. So a lot of interesting kind of challenges to your question is almost every project that I've done, we've achieved what we set out to do. The place where there can be a big challenge is when that technology has a life or artwork has a life outside of maybe the spaces that it's most accessible. So if we do a very technical AI human collaboration piece, and then we go to a very technical arts festival where every single aspect of that process is scrutinized, the work communicates. But the closer you get to the edge of innovation, and the bleeding edge of what's possible, the harder it is for people to actually kind of step into the understanding of that piece. So I think one of the key pitfalls, and this is maybe advice for any other creative directors or projects out there, is if you are to deeply focus on the technical aspect of an expressive project, what can happen is that you can end up falling into a black hole of technical prowess, which no one can be a part of. And if you take chess, for example, you can see two people playing a game of chess, right? And you can see the pieces moving. But if you have two grandmasters playing, there is no way you're going to have an insight into the actual intense, stunning dance of concept that's happening. And I think that's a very important lesson, is that how can you make sure that what is remarkable about that project can communicate to every single person that experiences it. And that's a very intense, unique artistic challenge. It's a very unique director challenge. But that would be one of the main sort of challenges that I've come up against is making sure that what is truly remarkable about this piece communicates, and that you have technical prowess with remarkable kind of artwork with deep consideration of narrative. And I've said narrative 1,000 times in this conversation, but it tends to come down to narrative, the actual story behind it. That's what allows someone's mum, dad, brother, sister, granddad to actually engage with something. And the final thing that I will say on that is that's happening all the time, that kind of cognitive dissonance. If you're to mention to the eldest person in your family machine learning, what they're likely to say is, I don't want a part of that. But what's the issue is they already are. They are a part of it. They're using it every day. If it's not them, their family are using some kind of smart device. And it's important that everyone that is a part of the deep and rich web that is technology has a connection to it. And this black hole effect doesn't stop them being a part of it. So that's a big challenge. And I'm very proud of all of the pieces that I've made, but making sure that all of it communicates is definitely been one of the challenges, and it's something that I do enjoy.
I think, of course, coming from an ignorant place, much more an art consumer than a creator, it is the ultimate challenge of the mature artist to put yourself out there, but deduct the ego from it and make it still yours, but still make sure that someone can relate to it in some form. But all the while, not making it for the audience, but for yourself. So a catch-22 to the power of 22, essentially.
Well, I will say that the most, just very quickly, that the beauty of interactivity and data contribution, like this is what I love about generative systems. So I can build something that an individual can contribute data towards, and they become a part of the artwork. And I think that's one way that I think you can really make sure that every piece that you make has some connection to those around you. I could take the voices of everyone at Netguru and produce a visual artwork. And immediately what you have is not just a beautiful piece, but you are all a part of that work. And immediately you can see that there's something interesting happening there.
Some sense of unity, right? So my last question before we jump into the comments, the sea of comments, actually. I'm handing you a magic wand. You're allowed to cast a spell. Each 12-year-old gets to learn, or not even gets to learn, I don't want to say is forced to, but they're blessed with the gift of education on a specific topic. We've heard financial prudence, we've thought systems thinking, we've heard what was it? Emotional intelligence. So of course, feel free to repeat, but if you do, just build on that, because I want to make it yours, not just hear the same thing that I've heard before.
Yeah, no. My honest, intuitive response was emotional intelligence, which I guess for me encapsulates compassion and empathy, intuition. I think it's something that can be quantified. It's something that can be taught. But I think it's not necessarily a formal thing, but I would say that the belief in expression, if we are to kind of take a step away from the idea of education, it's more of an attitude. It's an approach that every single person has the right to creativity and expression. And I think that through the education system and through my favorite word, narrative, there is actually an unlearning that occurs, that everyone has the right to express. Being creative is not an artist sort of privilege. It's something that we all have. It's something that we all do. We all make new connections. We all have identities. And I think if I could do anything with this magic wand, I would want to instill that in young people so that it's never lost. And it's the fact that you can express. The arts is just one word for one space, but creativity is all encompassing, and expression is so important for your well-being and your mental health and for your influence in the world. And I often think about all the people that have remarkable ideas and remarkable contributions and they stay silent. It's like, why does that happen? Maybe if there was another way to express that, if there was another mode to express that, those ideas might be shared with the world. And of course, vocal expression is a big part of that, but I didn't want to be too obvious.
So essentially, abracadabra, remove all shame that there is in terms of creative expression. Let's swing into the comments. Let's start with one from the person that actually made this conversation possible. So shout out to Przemek and his question, which is, as we see the increased usage of voice in the tech world, MIDI controllers like Voclia that you had a chance to use, or apps like Clubhouse, what is the future of the voice and tech connection? What might that look like? What is there that is above what we're used to speaking to our assistants on the phone or smart speakers? I'm thinking Przemek wants us like give us something from the future.
Yeah, so something I believe in is something called ambient technology. I believe that eventually, through network connectivity, we will be able to the betterment, I would hope, of society, be able to be immersed in these systems, which we technically already are, except it will be disaggregated. So we won't so much be about a phone, it would be about around the networks that surround us. I believe that the key connection between decision-making and consciousness and these systems will be voice. And in the ways in which we talk to each other, when we actually interact with one another, every conversation you're having is one of the most complex acts in all of nature. If you look at it as a system, as a process, as a tool, it's stunning. And the flow state of thought to spoken word to action, everybody is rap freestyling all the time, but like way more complex than any rapper has ever rapped in their entire life. So it's important to reveal that. But that fluidity, that connection, to be able to call upon an idea, I think will extend into the external world. So through networks, we're able to call up systems, actions, interactions instantly. And the key connection will be voice. So when you look at apps like more grounded and more in the present, when you look at apps like Clubhouse, it's really interesting because the ideas that I've been lecturing around for the past 4 years are being pushed by sort of innovations like this. And regardless of what you think of Clubhouse, it's definitely making people reconnect with the importance of voice. And these ideas like the human voice is your brand. I don't like that term. It does make sense, but actually there is many remarkable aspects of this regarding how it's going to be fundamental to how we not just connect to each other on a human level, but through networks and meet social medias. You're just going to see voice more and more and more because it is the ultimate system.
I agree that, especially with Clubhouse, because we've seen that there's the $4 billion valuation, but there's also the drop in downloads between, I think, February and March. But still, it's not to be looked at, is this going to be the next Facebook in terms of success? I'm looking at this much more like this is the one that's paving the way for every other app to wake up and say, oh, Telegram, oh, Twitter Spaces, oh, we got to jump on the gravy train because it's already going. So completely agreed that this is just sort of reshaping the perception that we have here. Dominica asks this: Harry, do you know Chris Corner from IMX? Looking at your work, it came to my mind that you could do something extremely beautiful together.
No, but I will check them out. Yeah, no, I'm always so happy to kind of find out about new artists. And when I step out of the art space, which is, I guess, in some sense what I'm doing here, it's always important to find those objective themes and the reasons that maybe artists are discussing our arts in a way that hasn't been sort of shared so commonly. But in the art space, like, collaboration is king, and this idea of having opponents or mentors or collaborators, whether they're AI or other artists, I'm always looking for challenges, which is key to my creative process, is being pushed. I love to be challenged and tested. So finding new artists, either for collaboration or rivalry, is always really good.
Dominica, shoot Harry a message, link us up with what you meant, and let's see, maybe there's room. Last question, since we're on the 57th minute mark, but this is a big one. I hope it'll fit on the screen. Mikao asks, Harry, so how at this point can tech and vocal improve the communication between two different language systems? When it comes to beatbox, two artists can have a conversation in the form of jamming in the same rhythm, exchanging sounds, or combining them in the same genre. Is there anything that helps to communicate with voice, but yet beyond spoken language? Onomatopoeic words are actually the origin of every single language system. And you said my questions were big.
Yeah, you've been outgunned. I think, what you're touching on there is the meta connection between like semantics, like meaning in words, and then also the kind of, if someone doesn't speak English right now, what they're hearing is sound. They're hearing noises. And when I was doing, I think it was my second residency at Harvard University, I was there lecturing at the phonetics department, and I was there to explore something called paralanguage. So paralanguage is that meta space where you have the mechanics of musicology being channeled through the vehicle of speech. So if I think about tone and timbre and range, this is all communicating information which is contributing, it's contextualizing the actual semantics, like the words that I'm saying. So I think all language that is not text-based, there's a richness to that, and it falls into this blind spot that I talk about with voice, is like, what does your voice, and this is like everyone at Netguru, what does your voice actually feel like if you actually take some time to feel that it actually resonates like through your head? What is that tone? What is that pitch? Because consciously and unconsciously, you have all been judging me throughout this talk, and it's the unconscious part that's really fascinating. You're creating a story around me. You're actually taking that, and the psychoacoustics is a non-voluntary response. So thinking about the idea of paralanguage, like remove language from your voice and take some time to think about that, because your voice is not all language. There are other things there. So yeah, think about how it feels. Think about volume, think about range. Like when we, one final additional point, which frustrates me, is we always think about the health of our bodies, and we think about range if you look at things like yoga and like physical disciplines. But the voice is the body. Like it's a physical thing that's in you, and it's way more connected to your mind than your body in many ways, and your consciousness. So if you are always talking like this and everything you say is in this range and you never vary, you think like that. So if you actually explore and test the paralanguage of voice, not just myself, many other academics, many other specialists believe that you are stretching the mind, you're stretching the body that is the voice. And if you're not doing that, you are missing out on something. So that's just something that I'd leave with you all. It's key to communication. It's key to sense of self. It's key to well-being. It's part of your body, and don't let it go unignored.
I concur. I can confirm that when I went all in with vocal myself, an exercise that I recommend to everybody to sort of shed yourself of, anybody who's watching this, you're in the tech space, you probably have a serious position. So, you have a serious job, you're a serious person. But the moment you start doing the exercises for vocal preparation, just like doing the things with your lips or going up and down the entire gam, then that really liberates you in some sense. It's a very simple exercise. If you just Google YouTube vocal singing prep, anybody who's listening, you'll have a lot of fun, and you'll get to explore your voice in pitches and ways that you probably just don't use on a daily basis. So very much recommended personally. Okay, we are just after the 1 hour mark. So Harry, I wanted to ask you, I have one announcement, but perhaps you have some, or should we just be on the lookout for the projects that we mentioned during this talk, and that's it?
Yeah, I would say that I'm specifically interested in the metaverse at the moment, and the idea of being able to utilize the blockchain as a medium. And Voice Gems is a project that I'm working towards. There's also another installation which is focused on real-time interactive with artificial voices. So I'm actually able to create an AI artist and performer from any data set. So I could make one from you, Philippe, and I could actually speak with it and perform. Yeah, this is what I'm excited about, is to, across the board, push voice, push technology, using voice data as a medium. But then also, yeah, if anybody has any interest in like exploring these narratives, I'm open to always hearing like new ideas. And yeah, as you said, like, feel free to keep an eye out for some of the projects that I mentioned.
Even I'll take you up on this because I wanted to talk about blockchain with you, but of course later. So my announcement, dear audience, is that you should be on the lookout for our weekly newsletter, Netguru's Code Stories. It's not just about code. It has a lot of cool stories concerning everything to do with tech, and it's very digestible, not just for the technical person. So otherwise, Harry, thank you so much. I can't say what the comments say in terms of the volume and the positive expression. It's been great, and thank you so much for today.
No, my pleasure. If I can bring a different perspective on the arts, on voice, yeah, I'm happy, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being such a great guest. See you soon.
Cheers.